We're talking Saquon Barkley's potential contract, Dexter Lawrence's potential contract, and all things salary cap related with Joel Corry of CBS Sports, author of Agents Take. That's coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans. Welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and on today's show, I am very happy to be joined by Joel Corry of CBS Sports. He pens the Agents Take column, and he is very knowledgeable about salary caps, contracts, all sort of things, having been one time an agent. So, Joel, thank you so much for coming on with me. Really appreciate having you.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, Joel. My pleasure. All right, Joel, I want to start off with some generic topics, if we could, to kind of set the stage for what every Giant fan, I think, out there wants to know. And that is, when you're building a roster, when you're a GM building a roster, is there a prescribed percentage that you want to devote to every position on the team, or do you just kind of play it by ear?
Well, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Obviously, if you can have a low-cost rookie quarterback on a rookie contract, that's ideal, like the Eagles had last year, because then you can amass a bunch of talent around someone and have extreme depth like the Eagles had on the defensive line. We saw last year a huge dichotomy in roster building. Jalen Hurts had a very low cap number. Patrick Mahomes had one of the biggest cap numbers in the league. So they won the Super Bowl for huge cap number, but the opponent was at the opposite end of the spectrum. Most teams don't really like to invest in a running back. You tend to be able to find running backs at most places in the draft, but there are a handful of teams that do go that route. You typically will have more money invested in corners than safeties. There are some teams which do have a couple high-paced safeties. And obviously, left tackle is a premium position, and defensive linemen who can get to the quarterback also or where you may want to allocate a lot of resources.
All right. Now, keeping along those lines, every player probably in the history of the game thinks he's worth more than maybe what the market dictates. So when you're working with a player as an agent and working with a team to determine a player's value, what do you base it on? Do you look at, what the player did the year before? Do you look at history? What criteria goes into determining what that player's potential value is when he's in a contract year?
Well, you're going to put more emphasis on what the player did in the prior season, but you're also going to look at the history. You also have to set realistic expectations for your client. So if you can show him data, the market, where trends are going relative to how he did, then normally you can keep him from having crazy expectations about a contract. And then there are two different markets. The market for a contract extension versus the market for being a free agent are two different things. So we saw this year that it was not a good year to be a high-end tight end, that nobody was paying high-end tight ends, which is why Dalton Schultz and Mike Gesicki signed one-year deals, prove-it deals. It's a very deep year in the draft, so that can factor in the equation as well. But when you're talking a close negotiation, which is going to be extension, that's one thing. But also you have to take into account what your client's objectives are. Let's say you have a free agent who says, I want to go back to my own team no matter what. And that's a whole different scenario. If you got a guy who's like, I'm up for a money grab and I don't care where I play, I want to go to wherever has the most money, you're going to play that a little bit differently than the guy who wants to stay put.
You mentioned the difference between, contract negotiation or an extension versus being a free agent. In the case of, a negotiation or an extension, I should say, I would imagine market value obviously factors into it, but, also usually on the back end of the contracts, the number is usually pretty high for most players. So I would imagine getting that number down is always going to be an objective, right?
Yeah, if you have a guy who has a high cap number or salary in the last year of a contract and you're going to do an extension, then his cap number should decrease. And if it's a team that has cap issues, then that's going to be a benefit to them. You don't really care what the cap number is early on. You just care about the cash flow and the guaranteed money, how much is going to be secure at signing, or how much will become secure very quickly during the deal. Also had something that I would take into account with an extension, that I wouldn't necessarily go for every last dollar, because I'm doing a deal early, because I'm going to not have to deal with the continuous year poor performance, and I'm not have to incur the risk of injury by playing out of contract. I'm not saying I'm going to give them a huge discount, but I could get 96% of what I thought was the value was for great structure, and that'd be fine not to have to deal with those two things by playing out the contract.
All right. So the Giants actually have a couple guys in each boat. Dexter Lawrence, who's on the option year right now of his rookie contract. He's looking for an extension. And Saquon Barkley, who is on the franchise tag, his contract is up. So he's looking for basically a new deal. I want to start with Saquon, if we could. A lot of people, it was reported that Saquon was offered a deal at the bye week last year at a rate of, I think, 13 million APY, and he turned it down. Can you just talk a little bit about the pros and cons of accepting a deal at, when it's offered in season? I mean, is it smart to do? Do you think maybe in retrospect he should have taken it? Or is it just, let's gamble, especially knowing what the market was going to be like in terms of, the draft class, how that was shaping up, and the potential for, the Tony Pollards and the running back out in Vegas, potentially hitting the market?
Well, once I get to the middle of the season and I've already incurred a good deal of the risk of injury and I'm performing well, then you've got to make a very compelling case to me to get me to forego playing out the contract. You pretty much thought Saquon might get franchised, because at that time, no one was really contemplating Daniel Jones as being a potential franchise tag candidate, but he played himself into that, and subsequently a $40 million per year deal, which no one was really anticipating at the bye week. Now, that being said, I don't really want to be a running back if I'm a kid growing up, just because you have a short shelf life. You're only going to get one contract, and you're probably not going to be drafted in the first round the way things are going right now. Bijan Robinson may be the most talented player in the draft, but he may not go in the first round. And now we've seen this year that we've had Ezekiel Elliott's deal drop out of the market. He was the second highest paid running back at $15 million per year. You could have two other running backs who are potential cap casualties. Dalvin Cook in Minnesota, he could be traded or could be released after taking a pay cut. And Joe Mixon could be a salary cap casualty as well. So that's two guys out of the seven who are making over $10 million per year, and the two of the six who are making over $12 million per year. So Saquon, in hindsight, if the guarantees were right, and that's the big component of the deal, how much money is guaranteed at signing or how much becomes fully guaranteed early, if they had been right, maybe the way things have worked at the running back market, he should have taken the deal. I know they had further negotiations up until the franchise tag decision had to be made on March 7th, and now that deal is off the table. I'm assuming they're going to put another deal back on the table. Well, it'll be interesting to see if it gets to the level where they were before, or if they tell Saquon, look, we'll put this old offer back on the table. That's as good as it's going to get. We may be able to tweak it structurally, but if you don't want to take that, you can play on the franchise tag, which he did not want in the first place.
Right. What do you think his value is at this stage of his career? If you were advising him, what would you tell him would be a fair market value for him?
Well, I thought the deal, which was going to be his comp, the most recent deal in the marketplace at the time, was Nick Chubb's 3-year extension, averaging $12.2 million per year. So if he got $13 million per year on an offer with good structure, then that's something to consider. And you'd want incentives to take the value higher. I know he said after the loss to the Eagles that he didn't want to reset the market, which is Christian McCaffrey to shade over $16 million. Nobody's come close to that deal, even though it was done in 2020. And nobody is going to reset that market probably for the foreseeable future, not even Josh Jacobs, who led the league in rushing and yards per scrimmage. So if he can get 13 million, good structure, 3-4 year deal, incentives to push it to maybe 14, 15, if he's performing at a very high level, call it a day if you can get that still.
If he decides to play on the franchise tag, and that's just my gut feeling that that's what's going to happen, is that not a bad idea at this point? Because now next year he can renegotiate, maybe even hit the open market, because I'm sure the Giants are going to have other guys that might be in line for the franchise tag, or do you just think that, it behooves him to just get a deal done before the July 17th deadline?
I try to get a deal done before the July 17th deadline because I don't want to be a running back hitting the open market. That hasn't worked out well for running backs. The last running back to get paid in the open market was Le'Veon Bell. He didn't last 2 seasons with the Jets on a deal which averaged $13.125 million per year. This year, nobody got paid in the open market at a significant rate. Miles Sanders, who was 5th in the NFL in rushing, signed for less than $6.5 million per year. So I don't want to be a running back. Last year, $7 million was the tops you could get in free agency. I don't want to hit the market as a running back. So it's in Saquon Barkley's best interest to try to get a deal done. Now, if I'm the team, I wouldn't pay him. I'd franchise him this year. And if I could franchise him again next year for $12 million, it's a 20% raise, I'd do that and I'll let him walk. But they had made the decision that they were going to try to work something out long term. And you can look at it this way. He is better at what he does than what Daniel Jones is at what he does, which is probably why they were trying to get an extension done. The way Saquon got off to a hot start at the beginning of the year, it looked like he was really the guy that should have been the signing priority. Ultimately, that shifted because of the way Daniel Jones played down the stretch, and quarterback is obviously a more valuable position than running back.
Hey, Giant fans, something exciting is coming to Built.com on April 22nd. I don't have all the details yet, but the excitement is real and it's something you won't want to miss. If you don't know how Built works, they have the most incredible protein bars in the world, and they do these amazing flavor drops with unreal flavors in limited quantity. So mark your calendar and head to Built.com on Saturday, April 22nd, to be one of the first to discover what all the hype is about. I can't wait to see what this new flavor is. Make sure to use the promo code LOCKEDON15 and you'll get 15% off your order. When you, again, reports were that the Giants offered Saquon a contract averaging $13 million per year. Given how the market shaped up, where do you think he's going to fall now if the Giants come back with a totally different offer than the one they originally had on the table?
That's going to be hard for him to accept that, well, you offered me this based on what I did. I should still be able to get that. I don't know if they get a deal done if they drop it to 12, just because psychologically he may have a hard time getting over that. That could lead him to playing the franchise tag, but playing the franchise tag at your own risk as a running back, that's not something any running back should want to do. You got one bite of the apple. You're not going to sign up 2 long-term contracts at that position, at least for a lucrative amount of money. So the fair thing to do would be to eventually reinstate that previous offer that was rejected and basically tell them you can take it or play in the franchise tag. We can maybe tweak it a little bit. The deadline is July 17th for franchise players to sign long-term deals. Right now, he's not participating in off-season workouts, which technically he can't, because an unsigned franchise tag, you aren't allowed to participate in any of the off-season activities. There is one way you could, but franchise players don't do this. You could sign what's called a participation agreement. There's a form in Appendix Q of the CBA which outlines that agreement, which essentially, if you got hurt, you still get your franchise tag on a 1-year basis. But no franchise player that I can think of since the 2011 CBA was implemented has played on a participation agreement or signed one for offseason to be around for the offseason.
There's a belief amongst some Giants fans that Daniel Jones's contract basically just kind of screwed Saquon, for lack of a better term. I'm not so sure the two are directly related, but what's your take on that? Do you think because the Giants devoted all this money to Daniel Jones that now they had to kind of reshape what they were going to offer Saquon, or do you think the two were separate?
No, they're separate. They needed to get somebody signed so they could use a franchise tag on the other one. So it was whoever was taking the deal was getting signed. To me, it's reminiscent of what the Titans had 3 years ago with Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill took the job from Marcus Mariota, wasn't expected to when he was brought over in a trade really to be the backup, played really well, and they had to make a decision. They got Tannehill done early, stuck the franchise tag on Derrick Henry, ultimately signed Derrick Henry to a 4-year deal averaging $12.5 million per year. The first 2 years were fully guaranteed, and that was all the guaranteed money. So I think that's a very analogous situation. And I don't think Daniel Jones' contract is going to prevent Saquon from getting a long-term deal, or they wouldn't have been negotiating a long-term deal with Saquon simultaneously.
Joel, having negotiated for clients in a past career, you mentioned before something with Saquon I want to touch upon, and that is the psychological aspect of it. You know, guys obviously come in and they say, okay, you know, I gave my heart, my soul, my blood, sweat, and tears for the franchise, and, you know, this is how I'm being repaid. How does an agent basically, you know, work with a client to kind of keep him from getting too down on how the business aspect unfolds?
Well, I try to indoctrinate clients to how the business worked early on so they wouldn't get to that point, and know that that's what you should expect teams to do. They're going to do what's in their best interest. So you should do what is in your best interest. There are two things NFL stands for. One, I won't say just because it has an expletive in it. The other is it also has an expletive in it, no effing loyalty. So as long as the players realize that, then they're not going to fall into that trap. I gave my blood, sweat, and tears for the team. This is how they repay me. They may feel that way still a little bit, but they're going to recognize they got to do what's best for me. They're going to do what's best for them. And we're both going to, if we can find a mutual intersection, then great. If not, then hopefully no hard feelings.
Yeah. I mean, some guys do get, you know, down in the dumps when they don't get what they think they're worth. I mean, we all think we're worth more than what we are, and no matter what our job is. And, you know, our employers in the market say otherwise. But Joel, I want to turn to Dexter Lawrence's situation, which of course is a little different than Saquon's, in that Dexter is under contract, but, you know, they're working on a new deal for him. You look at some of the deals that other interior defensive linemen have gotten. Has that helped or complicated, do you think, the situation with Dexter Lawrence?
I would say it's helped drive up his price, but complicated the situation for the Giants. Any offer that came in below Leonard Williams that Lawrence wasn't going to view in good faith, because Williams signed that deal a couple of years ago at $21 million a year. He was the better player among the two this year. Now you also have the fact that Lawrence is represented by Joel Siegel, who is Deron Payne's agent. So Siegel is going to look at it from the standpoint that Lawrence is probably a better player than Payne. That's going to be his floor. So if you can't get above Payne, we're not going to get a deal done. That's $22.5 million per year on a 4-year deal with, I think, a little over $60 million in overall guarantees and 46 fully guaranteed at signing. Then you had Jeffrey Simmons just signed a deal for $23.5 million per year, 4-year extension. Quinnen Williams will factor into this equation. I would want to get Lawrence done before Quinnen Williams, because Lawrence is going to look at Quinnen Williams as being his new floor, because I assume Quinnen Williams is going to come in above Simmons, and then you're going to probably have to pay Lawrence more than $24 million per year. Now, you also have to get somebody done, Lawrence or Barkley, because you only franchise one player. I would think that Lawrence would take priority over Barkley for a franchise tag next year, because you can let Barkley go in the open market, find out he's not worth what he thinks he's worth, and then maybe sign him at a discount. If he's not to the point where he's like, well, you guys had multiple years to sign me, I'll play anywhere else but here, no matter what the cost is. But Lawrence, to me, you have to get done. The longer you wait, the more it's going to cost, because you've got Quinnen Williams sitting out there. And then Chris Jones is the wild card. He said I think late last year during the playoffs, that he wanted all these young guys to blow it out of the water. Chris Jones was the best interior defensive lineman last year. Aaron Donald is at 31.7 million on the average. Chris Jones is going to come closest to that. Now, under the theory that a rising tide lifts all boats, if Chris Jones eventually comes in at 30 and you've got Quentin Williams, let's say at 24, then that's going to make it easier for Lawrence to get more money than he would without Jones's deal in the marketplace, because there shouldn't be that big of a spread between the second highest paid interior defensive lineman and the third highest paid defensive lineman, which if Williams is done at 24 would be Williams.
What about, I know they're not quite the same position, but they are defensive line. Leonard Williams, he's also technically in the final year of his deal at a little over 32 million this on his cap number. He's a guy that, he's still, even though he's had some injury issues, I think the Giants would probably like to have him, beyond this year. How does that factor into this whole, picture with negotiating with Dexter Lawrence?
Yeah, that sets his floor, because he's like, I'm the better player. I know he played on a franchise tag. You paid him 21, but I'm the better player. You can't come to me for anything under him and expect me to think you're dealing in good faith. Now, Williams said something interesting late last season that he quickly backed off of. He suggested he'd be open to a pay cut. So I know what happened there. His agent called and was like, what the hell are you talking about? And he retracted that. So whenever you see a player make a statement and then he backs off of it and goes another direction, it usually means his agent was like, gave him a call and was like, you can't be doing that. You're going to be hurting yourself financially. And you'll see the player retracted. I remember Geno Smith, after the Seahawks loss, said that he wanted to do right by the Seahawks because they stuck by him when he could have been out of the league. That type of thinking only lasted for about 2 days, because next time he talked to the media, he wasn't saying anything like that at all.
Same thing with Saquon, if you think about it, because Saquon is like, I want to be a Giant for life. I don't want to reset the market. And now you don't hear that, coming from him. Not that he's spoken much, but, I'm sure the agent was like, what are you doing, man? I
think he kind of had to say, I don't want to reset the market, because nobody in their right mind is going to reset the running back market right now. That's position that's been stagnant. There's been no growth in the salaries of running backs since 2020. No other position has remained stagnant like running backs have. And I don't know who's going to raise the bar for running backs. I don't see anyone coming up. There was a time when that market really hasn't moved. In 2011, you had two guys close to 14 million. You had Adrian Peterson at 14.2 and Chris Johnson at 13.8. You only got one running back now under contract who has an average salary per year more than that. That's McCaffrey, and we're 12 years later.
Hey, Giant fans, make sure you keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast the rest of this week as well as next week. The rest of this week features shows recapping General Manager Joe Shane's Thursday draft presser. Bruce Feldman of The Athletic is going to be on the show coming up in the next few days. And then, of course, we're going to lead up into our draft coverage next week, which is going to be expanded. Again, keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And don't forget to be following me on social media. You can follow me on Twitter at Patricia_Traina, Traina. And on Instagram at Patty Traina, PATTITRAINA, for video clips, audio, pictures, all kinds of cool stuff coming up. With the defensive line market, I mean, this class is supposedly pretty strong. Maybe not as strong as running backs, but it's a decent class. So why do you think that maybe, defensive linemen can command the big money? Running backs can't? Is it because of the position value? Is it because, as you said, running backs just have a short shelf life? I mean, what do you think are some of the factors?
It's a combination. One, historically, anyone who can put pressure on a quarterback consistently, whether they're an outside linebacker, defensive end, or interior defensive lineman, gets paid. Now, running back, you can pretty much find them anywhere. I think the most famous case was Terrell Davis, 6th-round pick, and he's the reason John Elway has 2 Super Bowl rings. So you can get a running back in various places in the draft. Tony Pollard, 4th-round pick. Ezekiel Elliott, top 5 pick. He's out. Pollard gets franchised. They're going to go in that direction. Running back, you don't get another contract after you sign one big deal. Depending on some positions, you can sign 2, 3, 4. If you're an offensive lineman, you can get multiple bites of the apple. Obviously, quarterback can. Wide receivers can sign more than one big deal. But it's the nature of the position and how it's been devalued to a degree in a league which has increasingly been moving towards the past for the past 15, 20 years.
So there is something to this quote unquote theory that positional value is a factor in setting up contracts.
Yeah, it's all how you want to allocate your team. If you look at the Titans, Derrick Henry is their offense. So it makes sense for them to have a high-priced running back. They don't have any money invested in receivers. They wouldn't pay A.J. Brown. They traded him. There's no money really in any other skill position but running back. For that particular team, that's not the norm, but for them, it makes sense. But you only have 7 running backs making over $10 million per year. So that kind of tells you where the league is in terms of running back on the salary totem pole.
All right. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the contract, Daniel Jones, Scott. What did you think of that? And, prior to the negotiations, everybody was saying, well, there's really no such thing as a middle class, if you will, for quarterbacks. And this contract maybe fits that middle class. So let's start with what you thought of the deal.
I'm surprised they stretched as high as they did and gave him the incentives they did, where the deal maxes out at almost $49 million per year if he hits incentives. So basically, he can get in the mid to low 40s just by being a top 10 quarterback. You have a deal averaging $40 million per year, and maybe the last year's inflated, so it's really $37.5 million over the first 3 years. Then you're supposed to be doing what he did, or supposed to be a top 15 quarterback. Assuming he can play all 4 years, $40 million per year is still at the higher end of the market. The true middle class now is Jimmy Garoppolo and Geno Smith at $24.25 million per year for Garoppolo, and Geno Smith at $25 million per year is the base value. One way to look at it is thinking Daniel Jones got overpaid today isn't going to feel like that tomorrow, even if he just is what he was this past season on a consistent basis, because now you have Jalen Hurts at $51 million per year. Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert are going to join the $50 million per year club. Whenever Lamar Jackson gets signed, he's going to be in the $50 million per year club. So they're all going to push Jones down the totem pole in terms of salaries, or he's going to be lower in the hierarchy. Then there's going to be a guy in division next year that will be in a contract year that if he doesn't throw a bunch of picks this year, we'll get a new deal, and that's Dak Prescott, because the Cowboys keep kicking the can down the road. They made his salary cap number so high next year, they're either going to have to cut him or extend him. He has a no franchise tag clause. He's already at 40. So if Dak Prescott plays well next year, he's in the $50 million per year club. So Jones's contract over time is going to look much better than it does today.
And not only that, but also the cap's going to rise significantly over the next several years. So, while I think it might be Daniel Jones, and I don't remember the percentage, I want to say 17%, I would think the higher the cap rises, the lower he's going to count percentage-wise against the total cap.
Yeah, because we're going to have really the TV money start to really impact the cap, and you're not going to be paying back from the COVID year where you borrowed money from the future to make sure that the bottom didn't fall out of the cap. So for the next few years, you're going to see much bigger cap growth than you've seen in recent years. And you're right, Daniel Jones's deal relative to the cap is going to look much better as well.
When did that the borrowing from the COVID years, when does that end, or has it ended?
It's either ending this year or next year, but there won't be much to pay back if it's going into next year.
Okay. So that's obviously a factor that teams are taking into consideration as they set up, contracts for the future.
Yes. Well, teams do planning in 3-year snapshots.
Okay.
So when you had the COVID year, that really threw a monkey wrench in the equation because everyone was thinking 6 to 8% cap growth. And then you had the cap drop from 198.2 to 182.5. That was something nobody contemplated, and that caused a whole lot of problems where you saw teams starting to do things they hadn't done before, releasing players that they wouldn't have otherwise, or structuring contracts in ways that they didn't before. Teams that never used voiding dummy years had to in order to keep cap numbers low in the COVID year.
Joel, one final question for you. I look at the Giants cap situation as it stands today, and it's better than it was last year. I think we could both agree on that. But right now, where it currently stands, I think they have a sneeze under $3 million. If you look at the effective cap space, I think they're in the red. I mean, I look at their contracts and their cap figures from over the cap, which is what I'm using. You obviously have the real numbers, and I'm saying to myself, where are they going to get additional money? Because I mean, if they have under $3 million to work with, where are they going to get additional money? That's not going to be enough to get them through the rest of the year, let alone,
That's not enough to sign a draft class.
Exactly. So where,
hypothetically, if you got extensions for Barkley and Lawrence done, you'll pick up cap room, because there's no way you're going to have a contract where Barkley has the $10 million cap hit in the first year. That could drop in half.
right?
Lawrence, the same thing. You drop his base salary down to his 1.08 million league minimum. Layer signing bonus on top of that. His cap number could be under 6. Right now it's 12.407 million, and you could get enough cap room, which could get you maybe give you enough of a cushion to get you through the season. You also may have to restructure a contract, pick someone that you know is going to be around for a while and restructure him. That's something you see teams do when you move from the top 51 salaries counting to everything counting when the regular season starts, because once you have everyone counting into the reserve, you're going to want to have a little bit of a cushion, 2 to 4 million, to hopefully get through the season.
I was going to say, is there a magic number that teams need to get through a season?
Ideally, 2 to 4 million, because you never know how many guys you're going to have to put on injury reserve and have to sign other players. But there are some teams which operate at a much smaller margin. You got to remember, any unused cap room can be carried over to next year. Sometimes you don't have any cap room to carry over if you're cutting it real close.
Yeah. Tricky situation. And like I said, a better situation for the Giants this year, but I don't know whether, you mentioned Barkley. I'm not so sure that they're going to get a deal done with Barkley. I have a feeling he's going to take a gamble on himself like he did last year, but Lawrence certainly would be, a spot they can get a number down. And maybe if Leonard Williams agrees to a new deal, they can probably do something with that.
Well, what they could do with Leonard Williams, since he has such a high cap number, is you can always add voiding dummy years, convert money from base salary to signing bonus, and that'll lower cap number. That could be an option as well, given his cap number so high.
Yeah,
since his agent has probably got him off the pay cut train.
Right. I know he has a voidable year next year, but you're saying they can add additional.
You can have up to 4. If you're in the final year contract, you can add voiding years. Well, there could be up to 4, because proration of a signing bonus can be up to a maximum of 5 years. So you would do that. You need his consent to add the additional voiding years. If they told him, look, you either do this or we're going to cut you, then he'd happily add the voiding years, because if he put on the open market today, he's not going to be made whole in terms of his salary from another team.
And he's going to get the same amount.
He's not coming off the best year.
Right. And he's going to get the same amount regardless, right?
Yeah, he'd get the same salary. It's just it would be allocated differently under the salary cap. It'd just be accounting mechanism for the Giants to create cap earn. Won't affect his pay.
Well, Joel, salary cap is obviously something I always find fascinating. And I learn something new every time I read you or talk to you. So I certainly do appreciate you coming on and giving us your opinion on the Giants' finances, which are so important. Now, it's a factor that a lot of people don't really talk about, but probably should when it comes to roster building.
Yeah, the salary cap permeates everything in terms of decisions that a team makes in terms of the roster and personnel. So it's become something that people are more aware of than they have in the past. And I think in the future, more people are going to pay attention to the cap ramifications of various transactions a team makes.
Definitely. Well, he is Joel Corry. And again, you can find him on CBS Sports. He pens a column called Agents Take, writes about all things contracts, salary cap. Very, very good read. And he's also on Twitter. You can see his Twitter handle below if you want to follow him. Joel, thank you so much for joining me on the Locked On Giants podcast.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
All right, Giant fans, that'll do it for us for today. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow. We will have takeaways from Joe Shane's presser. Until then, for Joel Corry, I'm Patricia Traina. We will see you tomorrow, Giant fans.